There's a corner near the park where I still don't walk on the inside of the pavement. 31 years now. I cross to the roadside every time without thinking about it, and my husband used to laugh at me for it until I told him why. He doesn't laugh anymore. I was 23, I sold flowers. Let me tell you about that corner first, because you need to see it the way it was on an ordinary morning, before anything happened, or the rest of it won't land the way it should. The stall was my aunt's. Wooden, green paint peeling off the legs, a canvas awning that leaked in one specific spot, so we kept the lilies away from it. 6 in the morning I'd wheel it out from the lockup behind the pub, and by 5:30 I'd have the buckets set, and the water would be so cold my knuckles ached until 9. October. That particular October, the weather couldn't decide. Warm 1 hour, then a wind would come up off the park and go straight through your coat. The barracks gate was maybe 40 meters from where I stood, diagonal across the junction. Not the famous gate, not the one on the postcards. This was a working one, the one the lorries came through, the one where the men in tracksuits jogged out at 5:30 in the morning in the dark, breathing steam. And there was always a sentry. Bearskin, red tunic, rifle. The whole thing, the whole picture people fly across the world to photograph, standing there like an ornament while a bin lorry reversed past him beeping. That was the joke of it, really. Tourists came for the ceremony. I got the ceremony every single day at 8 in the morning, framed by a kebab shop and a bookmaker's. His name was Micah Sowerby. I want to say that early, because for years he was just the guard in every version of the story people told, and he wasn't. He was a lad from Barnsley with a chipped front tooth and a mother who sent him crossword books. I only know that because of what came after. At the time, he was a shape at the gate. Here's the thing nobody understands about those men. They're not statues. They're bored. 20 years old, most of them, standing still for 2 hours at a stretch, and the boredom sits on them like a weight. You learn to read it if you're across the road from it every day. I learned to read Sowerby. He blinked slower when it was cold. He had a habit, tiny, you'd never see it unless you'd stared at that gate for 18 months of your life, of shifting his weight to the left about 10 minutes before his relief came. Not a movement, a settling, like a horse before it's led in. And when the schoolchildren came through and one of them stood in front of him and pulled a face, he wouldn't smile. Not with his mouth, but something happened around his eyes. I used to give him a nod. Never a wave, that would have been cruel, he couldn't wave back. Just a nod when I set out the buckets. And once, maybe 11 months in, I looked up and caught him mid-blink, and I'd swear on anything you like that he nodded back. Half an inch, maybe less. I told my aunt about it. She said I was going soft in the head. That morning was a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because Tuesday was chrysanthemums, and I'd got a bad batch, and I was standing there at 7:40 in the morning pulling brown petals off with my fingernails and swearing under my breath. The sky was that flat white you get in London when it can't be bothered to rain, not gray, white, like the lid had been put on. The traffic was normal. That's the part I keep coming back to. The traffic was so completely, unremarkably normal. A postman went past on his bike with his bag stuffed so full the flap wouldn't shut. A woman was arguing on a payphone across the road, and she'd turned her back to it and was leaning against the glass, and every so often she'd throw a hand up. Somebody's morning falling apart. Ordinary. There were tourists forming up along the railings by then. There were always tourists. A coach had come in and disgorged 40 of them, and they had that particular walk people have when they've been on a coach, stiff, blinking, looking for a toilet. An American man was holding a camcorder. Big one, the kind you balanced on your shoulder. He kept walking backwards to get the whole gate in frame and kept nearly going into the road, and his wife kept grabbing the back of his jacket. A little boy in a green anorak had got away from his parents and was standing about 6 feet from Sowerby, absolutely rigid, arms at his sides, doing his very best impression, copying the stance, trying to be still. And Sowerby was Sowerby, bolt upright, eyes forward. 6 minutes past 8, by the clock on the bank. I noticed the van because it was parked badly. That's it, that's all. Not a shiver up the spine, not a feeling, nothing like they put in films. It was a white Transit, parked half on the pavement about 20 meters up from the gate, on the barracks side, near where the railings ran alongside the plane trees. Nose in, arse sticking out into the bus lane. The kind of parking that makes a bus driver lean on his horn. And I remember thinking, quite specifically, he's going to get a ticket. That's the last uncomplicated thought I ever had on that corner. The other thing I noticed, and I've had 31 years to turn this one over, there was a man walking away from it. Not running, walking, ordinary pace, dark jacket, dark hair, hands in his pockets. He came round the back of the van, stepped off the curb, crossed the road at a slight angle, not at the crossing, just cutting across the way Londoners do, and went past the front of my stall. He didn't look at the flowers. Everybody looks at the flowers. Even people who'd never buy any, their eyes go to color. It's automatic. I've watched 10,000 people do it. He looked straight ahead. And I remember I just pulled a dead pedal off and I looked up and I clocked the back of his head going past and I thought nothing. I thought absolutely nothing. He was a man. It was a Tuesday. Then he was round the corner by the bookmakers and gone, and I bent back to the chrysanthemums, and the wind came up off the park and lifted the awning, and somewhere behind me a pigeon went up off the road. The dog knew. I've never told anyone this part in a way where they believed me, so I'll just say it plainly, and you can do what you like with it. There was a woman at the bus stop with one of those little terriers, the wiry kind, the ones with the beards, and that dog started up. Not barking at another dog, not barking at a bike. It was pulling backwards on the lead, all four legs braced, head low, and it was making a sound I hadn't heard a dog make before, not a bark, more of a moan pushed out through the teeth. The woman was mortified. She was yanking at the lead and apologizing to nobody in particular and saying, "Stop it now," in that voice people use when they're embarrassed in public. The dog wouldn't stop. And I looked up because of the noise, and I looked past the woman and past the bus stop, and my eye went along the railings and landed on the van again. Nothing was happening. I want to be honest with you, because a lot of people who tell these stories go back and put a warning and that wasn't there. There was no ticking. Nothing was smoking. It was a white van, badly parked, on a Tuesday morning in October, and a dog was having a fit at a bus stop, and I looked at both of those things and I understood nothing at all. I turned round. To get the bucket of water from behind the stall. That's what saved my life, a bucket. There's a thing that happens to sound. People say I heard a bang, and that's not right. That's not it at all. What happened was the sound was taken away first. Everything went completely silent, the traffic, the woman on the phone, the dog, the pigeons, all of it. And it was silent for what felt like a very long time, and then something enormous hit me in the chest from behind and put me on the ground. I don't remember flying. I remember being on the ground with the wooden edge of the stall across the back of my legs and my face pressed into the pavement. And there were flowers everywhere, actually everywhere, chrysanthemums and carnations lying in the road like something out of a wedding. Then the sound came back all at once, but it was wrong. It was underwater. It was a long way off down a corridor. I couldn't hear. I could only feel that I was screaming. I don't know how long I was down. There was glass. There was so much glass, all the shop fronts on both sides, and it was still coming down in sheets somewhere behind me. And there was a whiteness in the air that I thought was smoke and wasn't, not entirely. It was dust, plaster and brick dust, and it took the color out of the world so completely that for about 30 seconds I genuinely believed I'd gone blind in some new way, that I could see shapes but not color. The air was hot in my throat. It tasted of pennies and of matches. Somewhere a car alarm started, then another, then 8 of them, all at slightly different tempos, and that sound, that stupid, ordinary, everyday sound of car alarms, is the one that lives in my body, not the bang, the alarms afterwards. I got onto my knees. There was a man in the road on his hands and knees too, about 10 feet from me, and he was patting the tarmac with both hands, over and over, systematically, like he'd dropped a contact lens. He was looking for his glasses. There was blood coming out of his ear. He was looking for his glasses and saying sorry, sorry, sorry to nobody. The bus stop was gone, not damaged, gone. I need to slow down here. Because everybody wants me to get to him. Everybody always wants me to get to the guard, and I understand that. That's the story. That's why you're listening. But I want you to understand what that corner was in that moment, so you understand what he was standing in. The plane trees had had their leaves stripped, and their bark all up one side, so they stood there pale and naked and steaming. There was a shoe on the roof of the bank. There was a shoe on the roof of the bank, and it stayed there for 4 days. The tourists, the coach party, were flat on the pavement in a long, broken line, the way you'd knock over dominoes, and the ones who could move were dragging themselves along on their elbows without getting up, without even trying to get up. And people were making a sound I've only ever heard once. It wasn't screaming. It was a kind of collective moan, dozens of people, each one making their own private noise, and together it came out as one thing. The camcorder was in the gutter still running, its little red light filming the curb. I looked for the boy. The little boy in the green anorak. The one who'd been standing to attention, 6 feet from the gate, arms at his sides. Because I'd been watching him 30 seconds before, and my brain had held on to him, and now my brain wanted him back. I couldn't see green anywhere. Everything was white and gray, and that color is not a color you forget. Everything was the color of ash. And then, through it, through all that hanging dust with the light coming through it in solid bars, I saw one thing standing. He hadn't moved. I want to be very careful about how I say this because I've heard it repeated so many times over the years and it's always said the wrong way. People say it like it was a stunt, like discipline, like some cold, mad, robotic thing, a man too well trained to duck. That's not what I saw. What I saw was a young man standing at a gate with his rifle still at his side, in a tunic that had gone from red to a sort of dirty pink under the dust, with his bearskin knocked crooked on his head, and a cut opened up along his jaw that was running freely down into his collar. And he was shaking, his whole body. I could see it from across the road, through all that ruin 40 meters away. I could see this boy's shoulders going and his chin going, and he was standing there, absolutely upright, absolutely in position, on the exact spot he'd been put. He was terrified. That's the part they leave out. He was 20 years old and he was so frightened he could barely hold himself up, and he did not move, and those two things were true at the same time. And I don't think I understood a single thing about courage until I saw those two things be true at the same time. The blast had come from his left and slightly behind, and it had thrown things at him. The railing behind him was bowed inward like something had leaned on it. There was a piece of the van's door, I didn't know that then, I learned it later at the inquest, embedded in the brickwork of the gatepost about a foot above his head, driven in edge-on, deep, like an axe in a stump. A foot above his head. He was blinking, fast, blood and dust in his eyes. He blinked and he kept his eyes forward. And then something happened that changed the shape of my whole life, and I've never been able to explain it properly to anyone. He looked at me. Across all that. Across the road, over the bodies, through the dust hanging in the sun. This boy who wasn't allowed to look at anything, who'd stood there for a year and a half and never once, not properly, met my eye. He turned his head about 15 degrees and he found me, kneeling in a road full of my own flowers. And he checked I was alive. That's what it was. There was nothing else in it. He looked at me for maybe a second and a half, and his eyes went down my body and back up to my face, and I saw something in him let go. Then he faced front again. I don't remember standing up. I remember being upright, and I remember the road tilting, and I remember putting my hand on the corner of the ruined stall and my palm coming away full of splinters, and not feeling any of them. There was a man on the pavement near the pub trying to give somebody his coat. He'd got it half off and he was standing there with one arm out of the sleeve, holding it toward a woman on the ground, and she wasn't taking it, and he just kept holding it out, over and over, offering. Nobody in a crisis behaves the way you think they'll behave. Nobody was heroic in that first minute. Everybody was small and stupid and human. We were all looking for glasses or offering coats or apologizing. Except the man at the gate. He had his post, and in a world that had come apart in front of him, that one fact, I am the sentry, this is my post, was the last solid thing left standing, and he had both hands on it, and he was not letting go, and I honestly believe that if he'd let go he'd have gone down like everything else on that street. Then I heard him shout. First human voice I'd heard properly through the ringing, and it wasn't a scream and it wasn't a cry for help. It was an order. Stay back from the railings. Barnsley, flat as a board, loud enough to carry over 8 car alarms. People turned. That's what discipline is for, I think. I've had 31 years to think about it. It isn't for standing still. It's so that when the world ends, there is one voice on the street that sounds like it knows what happens next. 3 or 4 people who'd been staggering toward the railings stopped where they were. Get away from the railings. Move back now. He hadn't left his post. He was standing exactly where he'd been standing since 6 o'clock that morning, roaring at strangers to save their lives, and blinking blood out of his eyes and shaking. And then I saw why he was shouting. Past him, past the gate, on the far side of the junction, tucked in tight against the railings under the stripped trees, where I hadn't been able to see it before because the van had been in the way. There was a second one. A blue estate car, nose in, half on the pavement. Parked exactly the same way. Exactly the same way. And the crowd, everyone who'd survived, everyone crawling, everyone who could still walk, every single person on that street was running away from the smoke. They were all running toward it. Here is something I have never been able to make anyone feel. I knew what the blue car was. I understood it completely, instantly, with a clarity I have never had about anything before or since, and it changed nothing. My body would not run. That's the truth of it. Everyone thinks fear makes you run. Fear doesn't make you do anything. Fear takes the wiring out of you and leaves you standing in the road with your hands hanging. I stood there. I looked at that car. I thought, that is going to go off, in the same voice I'd have used to think that milk's turned, and I did not move a single step. The people around me were worse. They were walking. That's what I remember. Nobody sprinted, nobody screamed run. They shuffled. Dozens of them, wounded and deafened and coated white, drifting up the pavement in a slow crowd, away from the smoke behind them, toward the railings and the trees and the blue estate car parked nose-in on the curb. Because that's what you do. Something explodes, you go away from it. Nobody in the history of the world has ever been taught the second half of that lesson. Back, get back. He was still at the gate. He'd come up onto the balls of his feet. I could see it, that whole rigid column of a man leaning forward from the ankles, and his rifle was still down at his side because he wasn't holding it as a weapon anymore. He was holding it the way you hold something you've been told never to put down. Nobody was listening. Half of them couldn't hear him. The other half heard a voice shouting, and their bodies were already too full of noise to take another instruction in. An older man in a raincoat walked straight past the front of the estate car, close enough to touch the bonnet. He was carrying his own hat in both hands, like it was something he'd found. And Sorby made a sound. I heard it, it carried. Somehow over the alarms, and it was not an order. It was a sort of choked-off shout of pure animal frustration, the sound of a man watching people walk into water. Then I saw the anorak. Green, small, sitting up. He was on the pavement about 8 feet from the front wheel of that blue car, on his backside, both legs out straight in front of him like a doll that's been dropped. His hood was up. There was dust in his hair where the hood had come off it and back on again. He wasn't crying. That's what turned my stomach over. Every other child on that street was screaming, and this one was sitting quite calmly, patting the ground beside himself, looking left, looking right, looking for his mum with a sort of polite confusion, like he'd been separated in a supermarket. 6 feet from him, on the other side, an ambulance man had appeared from somewhere and was on his knees over a woman and did not look up. And nobody was going to the boy. Nobody. There were 40 people on that stretch of pavement, and every one of them was inside their own small, ruined world, and that child was invisible. Except from the gate. Because Sowerby had had one job for the last 2 hours, and it was to look at that stretch of pavement. And he had been looking at that little boy in the green anorak all morning, while the boy stood to attention and copied him. I've thought about the next 4 seconds more than I've thought about anything else in my life. I have taken them apart. I have laid the pieces out. I am 54 years old and I still don't have the bottom of it. Because here is what a sentry is. A sentry is a man who does not leave. That's it. That's the whole of it. Rain, sirens, sickness, insults, drunks, cameras, whatever comes down that road, he stands there. It is drilled into them until it isn't a rule anymore, until it's the shape of their spine. 200 years of men have stood at that gate and not moved. And they'd have found him a hero if he'd stayed. That's what makes me want to sit down when I think about it. If he had stood there and let it happen, he'd have been a hero. Photographs of him in his ruined tunic, discipline in the face of terror, the line held. He looked at the boy. He looked at the car. I watched him look from one to the other, twice. And then Micah Sowerby, 20 years old, of Barnsley, threw his rifle down. I want to say that again, because it took me 20 years to understand it. He didn't run with it. He didn't sling it. He threw it down in the road in front of the gate of a royal barracks, and I heard it clatter on the tarmac. And if you know anything at all about what those men are, you will understand that in that moment he tore something out of himself and left it lying on the ground. He knew what he was doing. He knew exactly. He was choosing. Then he ran. He couldn't run. That's the other thing. He'd been standing at attention for 2 hours and a bomb had gone off 18 feet from him. He came off that curb sideways like a drunk, one leg buckling, and he went down on a hand and got up again without slowing. The bearskin came off. I remember that. It went rolling across the road behind him like a dropped log, and underneath it he had this flattened, sweat-dark hair, and he looked about 15 years old, and he looked like nobody at all, just a boy in a stupid red coat running down a broken street. He was still shouting, not words anymore, just noise at everyone, at nobody, get back, and people were finally starting to turn and look at what he was running toward and understand. 8 feet. He went past the ambulance man who screamed something at him. He didn't hear it or he didn't care. He got to the boy and he didn't stop and he didn't crouch. He hooked one arm under the child's arms and one under his knees at a dead run, and he took him off that pavement without breaking stride, the way you'd snatch a bag from a bench. The boy started crying then, only then, when a stranger picked him up. He got maybe 15 yards. He was running with the child's head pushed down into his own shoulder, his hand spread over the back of that small skull, and he'd got his body between the boy and the car, and he was still going, and there was a doorway, a sandwich shop, boarded now, gone for decades, and he was heading for the doorway, and I could see him working it out even at that speed. I could see him choosing the recess. I don't know if he made it. I've never been sure. Everyone who was there says something different. I only know that the second one went. I didn't hear it. I was thrown forward into what was left of my stall, and I ate the pavement, and I was gone for a while. When I came back, the street was on fire in 2 places, and I could not hear anything at all, not even the alarms. And the silence in my head was so complete that I remember thinking, calmly, "Oh, I've died, and it's this." Then a woman's hand took my arm and hauled at me, and I could feel my own screaming again without hearing it. The dust came down like snow. That's not a figure of speech. It settled on everything for about a minute, thick, soft, silent, and every single person moving in that road was white from head to foot, and the blood coming through it looked black. I got up, I don't know why, there was no thought. I walked toward where he'd gone. The sandwich shop doorway was there. The front of the shop had come in, and there was a bicycle in the middle of the road, twisted round a lamppost like a bit of wire, and I could not for the life of me work out how it had got there. And there was red on the ground in that doorway, wool red, tunic red. He was on his knees, face down over the boy, arms braced either side, forehead almost on the tiles. He'd got the child right into the corner of the recess where the 2 walls met, and he'd built a roof over him out of his own body, and he was not moving, and I thought the thing you'd think. Then the child made a noise underneath him. And Sowerby lifted his head. There was nothing in his face, nothing at all. He looked at me and he had no expression whatsoever, and his eyes weren't tracking properly. One of them was going somewhere, the other wasn't. He said something, I couldn't hear anything. He said it again, and I got down and put my ear to his mouth like a fool, and he was asking me, "Is he hurt?" I pulled the boy out from under him. The anorak had a rip in the shoulder. That was it. That was all. There was a scrape on his cheek from the tiles, and he had wet himself, and he was howling, absolutely howling, and I have never in my life been so glad to hear a sound. I said, he's fine, he's not hurt." And Micah Sowerby put his forehead down on the tiles of a sandwich shop doorway, and he wept, openly, like a child, great tearing sobs with the whole of his chest, on his hands and knees, in front of me and the boy and the burning street. For about 10 seconds. Then he stopped. He wiped his face with the back of his wrist, and it made no difference at all, and he looked back down the road at the gate. And he said, very clearly, in that flat Barnsley voice, the strangest thing anybody has ever said to me, "I've left me post." He tried to stand up. I want you to hear that. He had a hole in the back of his thigh you could have put 2 fingers in. There was so much blood in his boot that it was coming over the top of it. His eardrum had gone, both of them, and something in his shoulder was wrong in a way that made the arm hang. He tried to get up and go back and stand at that gate. I put both hands on him and shoved him down, and he fought me. He actually fought me. This half-dead boy pushing at my arms with no strength at all, saying it over and over, "I've left me post, I've left me post," and I was shouting into his ruined ear that there wasn't a gate anymore, there wasn't a post, there wasn't anything, and he couldn't hear a word of it. He didn't stop until the ambulance man came and got a hand into the leg wound. Then he passed out. The boy's mother found him about 4 minutes later. She'd been on the far side of the coach when the first one went. She had a broken wrist and she didn't know it. She came up that pavement calling one name over and over in a voice I still hear, and she got to us, and she took him, and she sat straight down on the ground in all that broken glass with him in her lap. She looked at the man lying beside her, face down, red coat, dust, blood, 1 boot full. She had no idea. She never saw a second of it. To this day I don't know if anyone ever properly told her. She said, "Is he all right? Is that man all right?" And I said I didn't know. 4 people died on that street. It should have been 30. The blue car was parked 11 feet from a bus queue that had emptied, because a boy in a red coat came off a curb screaming at strangers to move. They found his rifle in the road. Someone had walked past it and photographed it. It ran in a paper the next day, and there was a bit of a fuss about it in some quarters, the rifle in the gutter. And I have never wanted to hurt anybody the way I wanted to hurt the man who wrote that caption. I went to see him in hospital 11 days later. I had no business being there. I bought grapes because I'm an idiot and I didn't know what else people did. He was sitting up. Half his head was shaved and stitched. He looked at me for a long time, and I realized with a kind of falling feeling that he didn't know me at all, that I'd spent 18 months watching a man who had never once looked at me properly, that the nod I'd been so pleased about had probably been nothing, a trick of the light, a young man shifting his weight. Then he said, "Chrysanthemums." I said, "What?" He said, "Tuesdays. You do the chrysanthemums Tuesdays, carnations Thursdays." He looked at the bedsheet. 2 hours is a long time, love. You look at what's in front of you. I sat down. I hadn't been invited to. I asked him eventually, because I had to, because I'd been carrying it around for 11 days. I asked him why he stayed, after the first one, why he stood there in all that with a car door in the wall above his head and didn't go down, didn't run, didn't do the ordinary human thing. He thought about it for a while. He wasn't quick then. The blast had taken something and it came back slowly over about a year. He said, "I didn't decide to stay." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I never decided anything. There wasn't any deciding in it. I've been stood there since 6. He turned his hands over on the blanket and looked at them. "That's what it's for. That's the whole point of it. So you're still there when there's naught left of you to do the deciding." Then he said the thing. He said, "The only time I chose anything all morning were when I looked at that little lad." They gave him a medal. There was a photograph. He hated it. He told me years later that he'd spent the whole ceremony wanting to explain to someone that he'd thrown his rifle in the road, and that nobody would let him say it, and that he thought about that rifle every day of his life. He left the army in '96. He was never fit for it after. He got some money and it wasn't much. He drove a delivery van in Barnsley for 22 years, which he thought was funny, and I never once heard him say it without a little pause first. The boy in the green anorak grew up. He's a surveyor now. He got in touch with Micah when he was 31, and they met in a pub in Sheffield, and Micah told me afterwards he'd not known what to say to him, and they'd talked about football for 2 hours, and it had been the best afternoon of his life. Micah died last March. Kidneys in the end, but it all went back to that road. I went up for it, Barnsley in the rain. There were a lot of men there in blazers who stood very straight. The surveyor read something. He wasn't good at it, he kept stopping. I still don't walk on the inside of the pavement. And people ask me when I tell this because I do tell it. I've told it at kitchen tables and once at a school, and I am telling it now. They always ask the same thing. They want to know how he stood there. That's the bit that gets them. The stillness. The bare skin and the dust and the man who didn't move. They want it to be about discipline or duty or 200 years of the same gait. And I let them have it mostly. It's a good story that way. But I was there, kneeling in the road in a mess of my own flowers, and I saw what nobody photographed. I saw a terrified boy hold his ground, because he'd been made into something that holds its ground. And then I saw him throw all of it away, his rifle, his gait, the whole 200 years of it, for a child in a green coat who was 8 feet from the wrong car. He always thought that was the moment he failed. It's the only thing about him I ever knew better than he did. They train a man for years to stand where he's put. Nobody can train him for the 10 seconds when the right thing to do is run.